It was close to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It's around 6 months ago when a call came into my cell phone. I did not recognize the number. And as I answered, a voice came through the other line saying that they worked on behalf of the Lakeshore Hospital. A Jewish man who had contracted COVID was dying. And as they had my contact number as the Jewish chaplain at the Lakeshore Hospital, they wanted to know if I would come in to be with this person in his final moments. There are moments where you are not given the pleasure of time to think something over, but rather you are called upon to be spontaneous and to simply make a decision, not necessarily from the head, but from the heart. And although a million thoughts went through my mind, the safety, the issues of was there a way that this could be done virtually? Did this person have a next of kin? Who was this person? A complete stranger. I told the anonymous voice on the end of the phone, I will be there in the 7 minutes it will take me to drive from my office to the hospital. I stopped everything I was doing. I got into my car. And upon parking at the hospital, a person was there to meet me and immediately ushered me up to the COVID ward at the Lakeshore. I was first given an N95 mask. I was then given an additional face mask to put over that. I was then given an additional face shield to put over that. I was then dressed into a full hazmat suit. My heart started racing. I was extremely nervous. This was back in October, where we still did not have a vaccine on the horizon. We still really didn't understand what was happening. And as I was ushered into this room, I felt myself with my back against the wall, not wanting to go any closer to this individual out of fear that I was going to contract the disease myself. I didn't know what to say. I did not feel that I could hold the individual by his hand. And with a slow breathing, the person was able to somehow compose themselves. And he looked at me and said 7 words. My name is Avraham. Please remember me. And with tears rolling down my cheeks and a lump in my throat, I was speechless. And nodding to show him that I had understood, I started to say the Shema prayer. His eyes were closed. And as I finished, he was already gone. He died in front of me. And his last 7 words, shared with only me in a room wearing a hazmat suit, are 7 words that I now share with you. My name is Avraham. Please remember me. I have not been able to forget that experience. I have not been able to forget him. And over these heart-wrenching 14 months, those minutes spent in his room are the moments that have hit me harder than any other time. during this terrible pandemic. My name is Avraham. Please remember me. We stand here today at Yizkor. We will again be saying Yizkor on Sunday morning. And the heart of the matter is that each and every one of us wants to be remembered. We want to be remembered when we are gone. In fact, this message is perhaps the central message of Pesach, and certainly the central message of Yizkor on the last days of Pesach. Because above all else, Yizkor is that need to be remembered, to remember the past, and to be cognizant of the fact how it shapes our present, to always remember how the past even shapes our future. There is a plaque at the very end of Yad Vashem, Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem, with the words, Shecha mevi galut, v'zikaron mevi geula. Forgetfulness leads to exile, and remembrance leads to redemption. We, the Jewish people, are a nation incapable of forgetting. We are the people that we are because of our memories. And it was in 1937, when the handwriting was already on the wall in Europe, that the future of the Jewish people hung in the balance. David Ben-Gurion appeared before the Peel Commission, pleading to allow the Jews of Europe to emigrate to pre-state Israel, then Palestine. And this is the quote of David Ben-Gurion in 1937. 300 years ago, there came to the New World a boat, and its name was the Mayflower. The Mayflower's landing on Plymouth Rock was one of the great historical events in the history of England and in the history of America. But I would like to ask any Englishman sitting here on the commission, what day did the Mayflower leave port? What date was it? I'd like to ask the Americans, do they know what date the Mayflower left port in England? How many people were on the boat? Who were their leaders? What kind of food did they eat aboard? Well, not just 300 years ago, but 3,300 years ago, long before the Mayflower, our people, the Jewish people, left Egypt. And every Jew in the world, wherever he is, knows what day they left, and they know what food they ate. And we still eat that food every year on the anniversary. And we know who our leader was, and we sit down and tell the story to our children and our grandchildren in order to guarantee that it will never be forgotten. And we say our two slogans, now we may be enslaved, but next year we will be a free people. And Ben-Gurion went on to add, now we are behind the Soviet Union and their prison. Now we are in Germany where Hitler is beginning to destroy our people. Now we're scattered throughout the world. But next year we will be in Jerusalem. There will come a day that we'll call home to Zion, to the land of Israel. That is the nature of the Jewish people. Yes, today, we may not have a homeland, but tomorrow we will. These were Ben-Gurion's words that tragically fell on deaf ears to the Peel Commission. But Ben-Gurion was right. Was he ever correct? Because today, in 2021, indeed, we do have a homeland. And we have a homeland because we remembered. Our memories bring us to today, and our memories shape our future. And this is true not just for us as a people. This is true for us as individuals as well. 100 years ago, Sigmund Freud and his circle of psychoanalysts discovered that though we live in the present, we do so almost entirely conditioned by our experiences that we have had and ways we have lived in the past. I had an incredible experience where I firsthand understood this myself when I was on the March of the Living with a group of Canadians a number of years back. One evening when the group activity back at the hotel was taking place, I decided to leave the group, and single-mindedly I was in search of a building, 101A Panska Street. I started walking into downtown Warsaw, and then it was the thriving, bustling, modern European city trying to make its way out of the communist years and trying to become part of the West, a bustling, modern, cosmopolitan city. And I found Panska Street, one of the great main thoroughfares leading through the heart of Warsaw, and it was a brand new city, a brand new street. And there was shop after shop of condos and electronics and sporting goods and even high-end luxury stores. One shop was selling cell phones, the next shop, Apple computers. And I thought to myself, every building from the war has been knocked down. Every single trace of what was Europe, Warsaw, the Shoah, it has been flattened, and the Poles have rebuilt. And in the distance, there is one tall building that looks out of place, that looks like it does not belong, that it shouldn't belong. And I thought to myself, could you imagine? Could you imagine if in modern Warsaw, the only building left is 101A Panska, but what is the likelihood of that? Why was I searching for 101A Panska Street? Because it was the childhood home of where my late father-in-law of blessed memory was born and grew up before the war, Samuel Frankia, Shmuel ben David Chaim, Hashem Yinakem Dama. He grew up with his mother and father and family in that home and was the only person to survive the war. Although I never met him, I heard many stories about him. So I wanted to see if perhaps, possibly, there could be an additional layer of connection. And I kept walking. And as I went past modern store after modern store, I came closer and closer with each step until eventually I reached this old, tall building, clearly from a different time, a different universe. And as I looked up at the side, there was the address, 101A Panska Street. It was the type of Warsaw building that was centered around a courtyard. And as I went through a tunnel-like entrance, I found myself in a courtyard surrounded by a facade of different building fronts. And looking up, most of them were boarded with wooden boards. Some of them were derelict. There was graffiti everywhere. It was clearly a building waiting to be demolished. And yet for a moment, standing in that courtyard, I took in the smells, I took in the sights, I touched the stones, and I was taken back to a different lifetime that my late father-in-law was able to experience as a young child as he was growing up. And at that moment, I was connected with him on another level. And that too becomes an aspect of who I am and who my family is today. What is this Yizkor ceremony really about? Ultimately, it's our recognition on our part. So many of the significant passages in our lives, in our autobiographies, can be traced back to our parents, to our grandparents, to our loved ones, to those who preceded us. Each man, said Oliver Holmes, is an omnibus in which all of his ancestors ride. We are the collective products of all of those lives which have touched and entered our own. Parents, grandparents, brothers and sisters, teachers and friends. Those who have bruised us and yes, betrayed us. Those who have sustained and strengthened us. It was all recorded and all remembered by us. Now, physically, as we think of those who are no longer with us, we realize physically they may have left us. And tragically, this Yizkor, that may include children, nieces and nephews, not just those who are older than us. But whether our loved ones have departed from us physically, we know that their influence continues. They may be buried in the ground, but everything else about them is implanted inside of us. Unbeknownst to them, they made an indelible impression upon us that has been permanently recorded into our very beings. Their obituaries do not lie buried in some old newspaper. It's recorded and alive in our hearts and in our souls. My name is Avraham. Please remember me. 7 words is what it took for me never to forget Avraham for the rest of my life. I recall a conversation I once had with a master educator. He was sitting in his home and the discussion turned to memory and how our memories allow us access into the past. He told me a story about his grandmother and how the story has connected him to her and to the world that she was once a part of. She told him how Erev Shabbos in the Lower East Side of New York, she had the responsibility early on a Friday morning to go down to the shochet and bring home the family's chicken. First, she had to pick out and choose the chicken. She was always searching for a big fat one. And if the bird was too scrawny, she would hand it back and choose another one. And then the shochet would slaughter it and put it into a brown paper bag, which this little girl would carry home 5 blocks away back to her home. This elderly educator then described in great detail how sometimes immediately after being placed into the brown paper bag, the chicken, dead of course, would sometimes still thrash about as a result of its biological reflex. No head, dripping with blood, this 7-year-old girl would drag the brown paper bag back to her house. And sometimes the blood was so abundant that it soaked the bag and the bottom would simply rip out, being soaked through. And at sometimes this little girl would hold onto the chicken's feet and drag the dead bird back to her home. The educator turned to me and said, when my grandmother shared that story with me, every vivid detail of it could be seen before my eyes. Her world became a world I could then enter into, and her memories now become my reality and indeed future. We all have stories from our parents and from our grandparents. If we can recall them, if we can tell them to our children and our grandchildren, literally, the Higgadta Levincha, telling on the story to our children, then we continue to keep such people alive today. We can enter, albeit momentarily, into the landscape of previous generations and tell ourselves that we too were there. Chayav Adam lirot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. It was as if literally we were there. If we can place ourselves back into the imagery of previous generations, then we are able to tell ourselves that indeed it really happened. It was real. And ultimately, if we can get back to Egypt itself, then we can see ourselves as part of our people's ultimate story. And this story ends in freedom and a brighter tomorrow. Collectively, yes, we must remember Ben Gurion was so right. The Jewish people are unable to forget. We can't help but remember. And we dare not forget that we are the people we are today because we lived up to that ancient pledge, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yemini, if I should forget thee, O Jerusalem, may I forget my right hand. We are the people we are today because of our loved ones. And now, let us pause to remember them. Yehi zichram baruch. May their memories be for an ever blessing. Amen.